Afternoon, everybody. This is something of a special, not during my ordinary time slot, and until 5 minutes ago, wasn't sure if we were going to do it live. To quote Bill O'Reilly, we'll do it live with Dinesh D'Souza. As I'm driving down here, I'm listening to and sort of watching the new documentary that Dinesh D'Souza is putting out next week. It is amazing. We're going to get into all of it. For those of you who don't know who Dinesh D'Souza is, did 2,000 Mules, another amazing documentary, did the Obama documentary, but I will not mangle Dinesh's synopsis. Dinesh, great to see you again. Tell the world who you are if they're meeting you for the first time.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. I was born in Bombay, India. I came to the United States at the age of 17. Most of my career, I've been a writer. I've worked at various think tanks like the Hoover Institution at Stanford. And then about 12 years ago, I started making political documentaries, sometimes described as the Michael Moore of the right. My first one was on Obama, Hillary's America, 2,000 Mules you mentioned. The latest one is a departure for me because it's... my other films have in one way or another all been about the meaning of America. This film, on the other hand, it's about Israel and Hamas. It's about radical Islam, but it's also biblical archeology, biblical prophecy. So it integrates the political and the spiritual and the biblical and even, I would say, the apocalyptic in a kind of unique tapestry.
Bombay, your parents are Christian. What's the religious demographic or breakdown of Bombay?
So, well, India in general, 85% Hindu, about 12% Muslim, and only 3% Christian. But my family comes from a part of India called Goa, which used to be a Portuguese colony until 1961. And my family was converted to Christianity, somewhere between 300 and 400 years ago.
That is so cool. So you can trace back family origins to when converted from Islam
most likely from Hinduism to Christianity. And it was customary in those days when you converted to take a Christian name. So no surprise, my last name is Portuguese, even though I don't have any Portuguese ancestry. So my first name, Dinesh, actually in Hindustani means God of the Sun. It's a Hindu name, but D'Souza is a Portuguese name.
That's phenomenal. 2,000 Mules, and not to get into rehashing some of the stuff in the past, I found it to be amazing. There was a mild controversy which made the news in that, and I want to clarify it because I think people misunderstand what the issue was in order to discredit the entire movie and the entire methodology. But there was an issue of some video surveillance actually not matching over with some of the geo tracking, and somebody sued and you had to issue a correction, which people then used to basically wrongly discredit all of the findings of the entire document.
Exactly. They made it seem like I'm repudiating the film, or Salem Media is repudiating the film. Look, we offered two independent lines of evidence. The first is cell phone geo-tracking, reliably done, indisputable, really, used in all kinds of law enforcement contexts, as you know. And the other is video surveillance. And the video surveillance, I would say, is very valuable because of what it shows on the face of it, right? A guy pulls up in a car, it's the middle of the night, he's looking left and right, he's got a backpack full of ballots. So, but True the Vote, our research organization for this film, had led me to believe, in fact, they say in the film, that these two independent lines of evidence had been correlated to each other. In reality, that had not happened. So had I known that, I would simply have said it in the film. I would have said, look, I've got cell phone evidence and it's very powerful on its own. And then I've got a lot of suspicious video, which is coming straight from the states themselves. You look at it and see what you think about it. And it requires further investigation. Like, what is the reason for this guy standing, or not this guy, many guys, standing in ballot boxes and depositing one ballot after another? So unfortunately, that is a glitch, that is a flaw. And I figured, listen, I need to be upfront about it, knowing that it would be kind of misrepresented by critics. But, I've come clean about, as soon as I learned about it, I disclosed what the problem was. The problem could have easily been fixed. And the reason I'm kind of annoyed is had I known...
It was irrelevant to the findings.
It was irrelevant. That's right.
It's like there was a documentary called Died Suddenly, and they had a montage of people dying suddenly. And I said, well, one of those clips, I happen to know, as a matter of fact, predated COVID. I was like, it doesn't undermine from the point being made, but it will allow the detractors to then write off the entire thing instead of, and it was one incident where the video did not overlap with the correlative geo-tracking as represented, but the geo-tracking was still legit, and the video surveillance of the other incidents was not explained in terms of being legit ballot harvesting depositing.
There was a network that organized a ballot depositing scheme in the 2020. That's indisputable. And I think the reason that they've come so hard against the movie with straight out lawfare is because they recognize the power of it. And the power of even Democrats who saw it were completely blown away and were like, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but this is not on the up and up. I mean, you can't watch that film without coming to that conclusion.
We can't live through 2020 and think it was on the up and up. It wasn't. The only question is how bad and on what ends.
Exactly. And, interestingly, the new film, The Dragon's Prophecy, and if I can say, the website is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. If you want to watch it in theaters, it's in theaters 2 days. Easy to remember, Monday and Wednesday. So not October 7th, but October 6th and October 8th. And then October 9th, the next day, streaming and available for pay-per-view on Rumble. So I'm excited for people to see it. It's also available on Salem now because Salem's our medium partner for making this film. But I begin the film with some pretty raw and riveting footage of October 7th. And it's part of the filmmaking technique, which is just like in Mules, I didn't want to tell you about election fraud. I wanted to show it to you. You can see it. You're on the scene of the election. Similarly here, I'm amazed at how few people have seen real October 7 footage. I don't show the most disturbing or grotesque of it, but I show enough that you feel like you are riding with Hamas. See, Hamas took the footage, so it's from their point of view.
What's amazing is Hamas took the footage, live streamed it, broadcast it, and then you still have people who deny that it happened, or deny that it happened to the extent that it did, or deny the responsibility, say like, X amount of people were killed by Israeli friendly fire, therefore we don't believe anything. It's the way of throwing out everything by taking one example of something that was not necessarily 1,000% as represented. The whole decapitated babies argument on the internet, where they said that may or may not have happened, therefore none of it happened, as if it changes a damn thing as to what happened.
What I found so striking is we are in a kibbutz right on the Gaza border, 700 yards away. And I'm talking to this woman, Lishai Miran. Her husband is currently a hostage. And in fact, I just saw a report that Hamas claims that they, quote, can't find him, which cannot be good news. But in any event, she says, these 5 monsters came through my window. They were in my house. We were hiding in our safe room. They shot the neighbor's kid. And I realized as I was talking to her that I actually have the footage of that event. I have the Hamas guys in her house. So this is a case where we're doing an interview, and under normal movie circumstances, you would have to recreate that incident to show what happened. But no, I don't have to recreate it. I actually have it. And so part of what gives this movie its kind of arresting power up front is it's showing you real live events as if you were right there 2 years ago.
We're going to get into the documentary itself. It's fascinating because it's sort of an interpretation of events through the lens of the Bible. But again, one thing up front, because I know people are going to watch this and they're going to say this is the biblical version of the propaganda arm of a government that is trying to convince America why they need to support Israel in the fight against Hamas, Iran. And you have to know that it's going to happen. You don't have to agree with it to know it's going to happen. They're going to say, you try to go with the political argument, and now you're going to go with the religious argument to say it's biblically necessary. What accusations have you faced up to date in terms of being funded by?
Well, I almost have to chuckle here because yes, these days, for the first time really in my life, I will post things and people go, "Did you get your $7,000 check, Dinesh? Like, how much is Israel paying you?" Now, first of all, the reason I think that these attacks are going to continue is because I'm actually truly an outsider to all this. I've made 8 films already. Not a single one has been about Israel. So no one can say I'm obsessed with Israel. I've never talked about Israel before. Number 2, I became very enchanted with biblical archaeology for reasons having to do with Christian apologetics. They have nothing to do with Israel per se. What it is I'm like, wow, isn't it amazing that after 2,000 years, figures in the Bible that were previously only in the Bible, meaning there was no non-biblical authentication of them, turn out to be real people, real events. And I'm talking not just about Pontius Pilate, who lived 2,000 years ago and presided over the trial of Jesus. I'm talking about Isaiah and Jeremiah, who lived 600 to 800 years before that. King David, who lived 3,000 years ago, going back to Abraham 4,000 years ago. You would think that these nomads like Abraham would have left no traces. As it turns out, there is archaeological evidence, and it's coming out like in the last 25 years. So it's almost like as the world has become more secular, it's like God is like whispering back, but now in the language of science itself, undeniable, right? So I'm entranced by this. So my wife and I begin donating to it. So we've given $100,000 a year to biblical archaeology in Jerusalem for 3 years. And so now I have all these people go, you're on Israel's payroll. I go, actually, let me correct you. Israel is on my payroll, because I believe in this stuff on biblical grounds, and that's how I became intrigued. Now, then along comes October 7th, and I'm scratching my head, and I'm trying to put these two very different things together, right? October 7th is thoroughly political. There's a war going on, and I go, you know what? They are actually connected. Why? Because in the end, this is a fight about whose land is it, and the biblical archaeology, which I became intrigued about for religious reasons, has a political dimension to it, because guess what? You cannot be a colonizer if you are the original inhabitant of that land, right? I mean, you can't accuse the Irish of colonizing Ireland or the Indians of colonizing India. These are the original inhabitants. So that's how those two things came together. And then I met this other guy, Jonathan Cahn. He wrote the book, a massive bestseller, by the way, called The Dragon's Prophecy. And he makes the startling claim that the battle between Israel and Hamas and the Palestinians is a recreation of ancient battles between the Israelites and their classic enemies. So the Amalekites, the Moabites, but most notably the Philistines. And he doesn't just say that, look, the name Philistine, the name Palestine, it's the same name, it's the same word. He elaborates by showing that the tactics of October 7th and the tactics recorded in the Bible, you can look at them and they are eerily the same.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate that element of the theme of it, where you talk about back in the olden days, they would capture prisoners and parade them around. Part of me says, on the one hand, that's just what people do in battle. I mean, that's just the nature of war, humiliating and degrading your enemy. And for those out there, by the way, who are saying you are on Israel's payroll, one thing that I did find, I'm not kissing your butt at all, what I found particularly good about the documentary is it was surprisingly even-handed in that even the people who support Israel say, at what point is it too much, even as a retaliatory or tactically necessary goal? How many is too many? Some people will say, you asked for this type of response by what you did, and so you can't complain about it now. And others are going to say Hamas is the master of placing civilians in harm's way, so they could use their bloodshed as further evidence as to how evil the reprisals. The documentary was surprisingly even-handed on that front.
Yes, it frames it a little bit. I would put it in moral terms like this. It is one of the most diabolical tactics of evil to put good people in a position where they are almost forced to do evil, and thus evil kind of wins either way. So that is the conundrum of evil, that the evil person will stoop to a level to which a good person is like, the only way to fight this guy now is I have to jump into the mud pit with him. I don't want to be in the mud, but there's no other place I can go in the situation. So this is why the dragon in the title really refers to the devil, and it's kind of like it's a battle between good and evil. So part of what evil does is it tries to drag good into the mud pit.
I mean, the analogy, just the simplest, most exaggerated analogy is somebody charging ahead with a baby as a shield. And if you have to shoot the baby, then they say, look what you did, you just shot the baby.
Exactly.
The flip side is going to be, or at least my bottom line question is, that is the nature of the enemy. how do you fight that enemy then? And how do you fight that enemy in a way, because there's the war on the battlefield and then there's the war of public opinion, which, like it or not, Israel is clearly losing right now, at least with a certain generation who doesn't understand the nature of the warfare or even the dynamic. How do you fight that fight and try to win that fight in today's day and age? I mean, and I guess
I think the couple things. I mean, one of them is, I think one lesson you learn from this in the modern age is that if you're going to do a counterattack, you have to do it immediately. So if Israel had launched even carpet bombing of Gaza on October 8th, I don't think people could have said a word. But by holding back, you allow the original outrage to subside. In fact, Israel, I think, did a mistake, the government, by not really releasing the October 7th footage. They did it out of consideration of the hostages and their families. They created a mini documentary for selected journalists to see, but the vast majority of people know about October 7th, but they have not experienced it. I mean, I know about Papua New Guinea, but I've never been there. I have no feeling of what it's like to be there. This is where film can be very powerful, and that's why I chose to begin this film with that. But the second point I would make is that, and this is where I think the anti-Semitic element comes in. And I'm very reluctant to just throw that charge out. But what I will say is this: if anti-Semitism can be clinically defined as holding the Jews to a completely different standard than you apply to anyone else, then I think it's fair to say that we are seeing rampant anti-Semitism on the left and the right. Why? Because nobody says that after the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor and killed a few thousand people, and actually not that many civilians, that somehow America was, in its retaliation, forced to compute a number of casualties that would somehow match the number of the original attack. No, America just declares war on Japan, and even people who don't agree with the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs generally say, well, we should have done the land invasion instead. Well, that would have killed untold numbers of casualties. Similarly, of course, after 9/11, the United States goes into a massive bombing mode. Huge bombs are being dropped on Afghanistan. Nobody's even counting the casualties. And yet, on October 7th, suddenly, a different standard kicks into place. And I don't just mean a different standard being applied by Ilhan Omar. I mean that exact same standard being applied by Tucker Carlson. So we are now seeing, to me, a singling out of the Jews, which is, I think, a pretty good operational definition of anti-Semitism.
It is interesting. Have you seen the movie Pulp Fiction?
I saw it a long time ago.
Way back, and there's a scene where they're talking about the guy who got pushed out of a window because he massaged Marcellus Wallace's wife's feet. And then, saying, well, wasn't the response exaggerated? And he says, maybe it was, but you had to have expected a response. And again, like you say, had they done carpet bombing, and I'm not advocating for this at all. I put out my, proposed strategy the day after, and one of which would have been, the first thing is answering as to how the catastrophic intelligence failure happened in the first place.
Right.
You're not going to authorize the people who were at the helm of that catastrophic failure to then dictate the response, because then you're going to have 2 catastrophic failures. But, there is going to be a response. And if it had been unapologetic from the get-go, maybe things would have been different than, like you say, letting the initial shock wear off. And then people are like, you're still doing this 2 years later. We've forgotten about the original October 7. But the holding of Israel to a different standard, people did complain. I wasn't alive at the time, but people did complain about the righteousness or the wrongness of bombing Hiroshima. I don't know if they referred to it as an act of terrorism at the time. No,
but right. And what I was suggesting was that objection was, in fact, about the bombing was simply because Hiroshima and Nagasaki were obviously purely civilian targets. They were not bombed for military reasons. They were bombed for the same reason that Hamburg and Dresden were bombed. Churchill thought that the German people were sticking with Hitler. He thought, we actually have to break the will of the civilians. I watched this documentary about, which had some new footage of World War II, and they were talking to an American bombing commander. And the American guy goes, I was given my instructions. This is like 1944. And he said, this was my target. I was supposed to go and bomb this target. And I asked them, I go, who's in there? And they said, 20,000 women and children are sheltered there. So he goes, I'm not doing it. And they told him, you better do it. It's your order. You have to do it. And he goes, and so I did it. But he goes, but it's haunted me ever since, right? So what I'm getting at is this stuff happens in war. By the way, Israel is not doing this. Israel is not targeting civilians. Israel is not trying to, quote, break the will of the Palestinian people. Israel is targeting Hamas. And so there is an absolute moral chasm. My wife posed a question to me the other day that took me by surprise. She goes, why do you think Israel doesn't take hostages? Right? This is kind of a shocking question. And I was like, is it because Israel just isn't like that? It doesn't do that? She goes, no. Israel doesn't take hostages because Hamas wouldn't care. In other words, when the other side goes, it's a little bit like Danny DeVito in that movie, right? They kidnap his wife. He's like, keep her. I don't want her.
Which one was that? Was it Ruthless People?
I think, yeah, it was the kidnappers thought they had a prize. You know, they got his wife. He's a successful business guy. And he's like, oh, well, actually, this is the best news I've, so yes, you're dealing with, and I think for Americans, the idea of comprehending that psychology is almost impossible. I saw a woman the other day, and she was saying this. She's like, I've given the blood of my 2 children. And she goes, I only have 2 more. And you think she's going to say, and so I don't support this war. I've already lost 2 kids. The last thing I would want is to, but no, she's like, I cannot wait for them to be martyrs. And so what American mom can get their head around something like this?
I think that part, on the one hand, nobody can. And the people who can't sometimes say, I just don't believe it's happening. I believe that's propaganda. Just to steelman one response, the people would say Israel does take hostages. They're in prison because they shouldn't be there. So any prisoner that Israel has is by definition a hostage. And then the flip side is people would also say that Israel is targeting hospitals and civilian infrastructure, but pretending they're not. I mean, that's where you can never even agree on a set of facts, because they're going to say, some people are going to say they're not doing it. Others are going to say they are doing it, but pretending they're not. And then some are going to say they are doing it and basically boasting that they are.
Well, some of this admittedly is the fog of war, right? And it is true that if you look at the great literature on war, particularly Tolstoy, he's so good on this. He describes, he describes a guy who's out in the battlefield, and he says, prior to the battle and after the battle, there are all these strategy manuals. And even after the battle is won, armchair pundits will give 7 reasons why one side prevailed. He goes, to the soldier on the battlefield, none of this is relevant. It's all smoke. You can hardly see 8 feet. There's no general's orders that even matter. You're just moving desperately, and all the analysis is going to come afterward. And they will be like, it was the strategic genius of Robert E. Lee. That is an ex post facto rationalization for an outcome that actually has very little to do with the facts on the ground. So I think we should be aware of all that. Now, what I try to do in the film, in drawing the biblical parallel, is the biblical parallel reaches a fairly striking limits. The 4 colors of the apocalypse in the book of Revelation.
That I found.
Right? Happened to correspond.
If the Palestinian flag had been any other 4 colors, I bet you could find something of other colors in the Bible to come to that conclusion, but for those who don't know,
right? But the 4 colors, right? So the 4 colors of the apocalypse are there's the red, there's white, there's black, and there's green, and each of them stand for famine, death, destruction. And then you just look at the Palestinian flag, and it's red for the red horse, it's white for the white horse, black for the black horse, green, by the way, symbolizing death. Let's go further. The name Hamas, which is an Arabic word where it refers to resolution, strength, but in Hebrew, and in fact in the Hebrew Bible, if you look at the Hebrew version of the Bible, you get the following lines: Lord, rid me of the men of Hamas. Hamas means violence, destruction, death. Hamas dwells in the dark places of the earth. I mean, this is fascinating, right? Right now, Hamas is being offered a deal, right? And we are not sure, you or I, what Hamas is going to do. What my film predicts is that Hamas is not going to give up on its name. It's not going to give up on the death and destruction. They might make a tactical move, like, oh, guess what? We're going to lay down arms right here. But Hamas is structured as a instrument of destruction. In fact, it's in their charter. And so the leopard doesn't change its stripes, its spots, and Hamas is not going to move away from Hamas. So the film, it's grounded in the political, right? Tucker Carlson poses a question to Ted Cruz. I take that same question and I ask Netanyahu. I asked Netanyahu to comment on Jesus. I mean, which, think about it. The Jewish head of a Jewish state is commenting on the most famous Jew of all time. Fascinating by itself. But the apocalyptic and the biblical side of it, I think, is intriguing even for people who are not particularly religious.
It is the historical element. Call me biased or whatever. The historical element as to who was there first, putting it in quotes, has never been at issue. The only question is there a actus novus, like in the interim that the Jews have been in exile for the thousands of years, other people have taken it over, and now your initial claim is over. The Palestinian claim to the land fails on its own logic, because if you go back to the original inhabitants, it wasn't the Palestinians in any event. The documentary spells that out quite well. And then there's the reality that Israel is just there now, and like Canada is there now, whether or not it stole it from the natives, history is unfair. They're there now. They're not going anywhere. My question about the documentary is, it will be viewed as being not declaring war on radical Islam, but concluding that there is a war with radical Islam. And it is being fought by the Jews and the Christians against this Hamas faction of Islam.
Okay, but that needs an important qualification. I agree. There is a war. It's a physical and a spiritual war, but radical Islam has an ally, and the ally is the cultural left in the West. So it is some people call it the Red-Green Alliance. It's a very unusual alliance, right? Because if you can look at the cultural left as symbolized by, let's just call it LGBTQ, and you look at radical Islam as symbolized by, let's just say, the jihadis in Gaza or in Iran, these two groups do not exist comfortably with each other, right? You can't take the LGBTQ and put them in Iran. They have to jump out of windows or be thrown off the roof.
The queers for Palestine will understand what happens to queers in Palestine, if ever.
There you go. And similarly, you can't take the jihadis in Iran. Imagine taking the Iranian parliament and walking them down the Folsom Street Fair in San Francisco. They would be extremely uncomfortable. So, and yet, these two groups are politically joined at the hip. They show up in the same rallies at Columbia University, and they have the same enemies. And the enemies are who? The Jews and the Christians. Israel and the evangelical Christians. And sure enough, the two biggest sort of attacks today, the attack on the Jews and the attack on Christians in places like Nigeria, where they are being rounded up, they're being beheaded. And so, yes, I would say that if the cultural left and the radical Muslims are mobilized on that side, it is time for the Jews and the Christians to counter-mobilize, not only politically, but also and militarily where necessary, but also spiritually.
It is fascinating. We've been talking about that. I call it an unholy alliance because it quite literally is. Like the radical left and radical Islam up in Canada, they protest together right up until they start teaching 2S LGBTQIA plus stuff in Muslim schools. And then you have actually the right and the religious Islam aligning ideologically to counter the degeneracy. If
they win, there will be a, just like after Octavian and Mark Antony defeated Brutus and Cassius, then they went to war with each other, right? There will be another war between the cultural left and radical Islam to settle which of them is primary. Each of them right now thinks that they are primary. They are the senior partner of that strange bedfellows relationship. And each brings certain strengths to the table, but there's something very, very bad. If they win, it's bad news either way, because we're either going to get a world dominated by the cultural left, or we're all going to be living under global Sharia.
Now, people are going to accuse, I said it before, it's going to happen. They're going to say this is now the religious propaganda selling point for why we have to support Israel. There are people out there, and it's a big, I mean, I don't know how big it is, a substantial portion of Trump's MAGA base.
Especially a lot of younger guys.
Say it's the Middle East. how has Israel been an ally to America any more than Ukraine's been an ally to America?
Okay, so I'll answer that. I think that deserves an answer. And here's my answer. Israel is, for two reasons, a incredibly effective fighter against radical Islam. America's record in fighting radical Islam is downright abysmal. Number one, Jimmy Carter pulled out the Persian rug from the Shah, and we got Khomeini. We actually enabled radical Islam get a hold of a major state. Number two, after 9/11, we go over there to Afghanistan. We pulverize the Taliban, chase them out of town. They're back. So they win long term. Number three, we botched Iraq. So our guys are nincompoops in fighting radical Islam. We just don't know how to do it. If you take a simple operation like the Israeli pager operation, you think that our CIA could pull that off? I don't. Our CIA has never done, I mean, they haven't gotten anything right since World War II. Now, why is Israel so good? I think there are two reasons. One is Israel is over there, so they have a more close-up look at the situation. America has a far more distant spectator viewpoint. Number two, Israel is, and you feel this when you're there, it is such a small country, so hemmed in. It's like I look a football field away and there's Gaza. So the Israelis are living on the edge. It's kind of like if you're living in a very dangerous neighborhood, you are trained to look over your shoulder. You develop survival skills that an ordinary other person would not have. So I would argue we are terrible at doing something. That something is not caused by Israel. I mean, when you think of jihadis in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in Egypt, they don't wake up worrying about Palestine. They have a global jihad in mind. They want to infiltrate Australia, Canada, Europe, America. They want to build mosques in Houston and Dallas. They want to take over school boards. They want 100 Ilhan Omars. This is their global project, regardless of whether Israel exists or not. So we are in this fight, whether we like it or not. Why would we spurn an ally that is doing our work on the front line that we don't even know how to do?
I guess I can imagine what the response is going to be to that. Some people are going to say Israel's not fighting terror with us, but rather maybe they're even, on the one hand, and I'm not saying I believe this at all. I just know that this is the argument they're going to make, instigating it. That, the Iraq failures, to some extent, Bibi, he didn't have a hand in it, but he had a voice in it. And that, some would say that the failure is maybe part of the plan to exacerbate the situation to get to this one war that some people feel that Netanyahu wants to wage ultimately against Iran. Iraq was sort of a halfway step towards there. And so,
yeah, see, I mean, I lived through all this, so I know this is false. And I know this is false because I was actually, at that time, a supporter of the Iraq War. I was somewhat of a reluctant supporter because I didn't see the nexus to 9/11, but I went along with the Bush portrayal of the weapons of mass destruction. At that time, Israel was not on board. Why? Because Israel's strategy was really simple. Israel's strategy was, we need people like Ataturk in Turkey, the Shah of Iran in Iran, Saddam Hussein, because these are secular dictators that are going to keep radical Islam in check. So Israel was like, why are you doing it this way? The neocons who had their own agenda in America essentially overruled Israel and said, no, this is how we're doing it. We're going to go, break some eggs over there. And so this narrative that we're getting now that somehow Israel cooked up our invasion of Iraq, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just nonsense.
At least, see, this is where you get to a disagreement on the underlying fact, where this is where we're going to part ways in terms of a disagreement on the core fact, because I know people are just going to say that's not true. Bibi's always been trying to get to war with Iran. He was putting out the WMDs.
But let's remember, you had that massive Iran-Iraq war that went on for a decade. Yeah, it went for a decade with massive casualties on both sides. What sense does it make, to the degree that Iran is the sort of master operator of jihad, right? To the degree that Iran has the power, they have the nuclear threat, they have the wealth, the oil wealth, and to the degree that they have powerful proxies like Hezbollah now and later Hamas. And if your goal is to weaken Iran, why would you want the United States to go and smash the government of Saddam Hussein in Iraq? What is the logic of that?
I think the easy answer would be the resources trump the strategy, possibly.
But we didn't even take their resources. I mean, it would be great if we had gone over there and said, listen, I mean, a good old colonial expedition to take the Iraqi oil would be, you can argue the merits of that. It cost us a giant fortune to do that war. We didn't even reimburse ourselves with oil revenues that do exist. And what we did ultimately is create a structure where Iran, because of the Shia connection with Iraq, was able to get the very Iraqis that we supported to defect to the Iranian side. So that just turned out to be a complete disaster. I think the Trump phenomenon partly came out of that. So this is the politics on the ground, but there is a lot of, and we're seeing some of this from the right as well. And I don't think you could have gotten away with this a generation ago. We've become a little bit of an idiocracy, sort of a society of stupid people. So you can now put out. We have intellectuals of the idiocracy, right? And their names are like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson.
Just so people understand, idiocracy, not idiocracy.
Okay, idiocracy. Yeah, that's right.
Idiocracy sounds like a merit-based idea.
That was an idea. No. It's the idiocracy. Sorry. That's right. I don't want to sound like an idiot. I'm an idiot, right? So, and we have an intellectual class that is actually well suited to that, because what they do is they take issues and they reframe them in obviously false ways, but young people don't know better. So let's say, take an example. You'll have Tucker say something. Oh, he doesn't say it. His guest says it, because Tucker uses what I call the ventriloquist journalism mode. Right? He has a view, but he raises a question which is very leading, and his guest obliges. So the guest will come in and say something like, the United States should really have allied with Hitler against Stalin. Right? Shocking thing to say, really, because Hitler was on the global march. Stalin was minding his own business. He was doing a lot of bad stuff inside his country, but he was not a global threat. Hitler was. So what could be the rationale for allying with Hitler against Stalin? None. And there's no attempt to defend this at all. Now, after World War II, Patton and others took the view, listen, now that we have neutralized, now that we have shut down the Nazis, maybe we should march on to Moscow. That's a whole different thing. That's not saying we should have allied with Hitler, but it's saying, having defeated Hitler, we should now consider keeping it going. But of course, in reality, the mood in America was, we won, come bring the boys home. So that was never practical. But what happens is, when this guy goes, we need to ally with Hitler, Tucker will, there were some people at the time who sort of took that position, and he's completely misrepresenting what the debate was at the time. Nobody took the position that Hitler is our best friend and we need to back Hitler against Stalin. So this landscape is twisted 75 years later, when there's no adult in the room to step in and go, you are completely misrepresenting what happened during and in the aftermath of World War II. This factoid now becomes a kind, at least in the minds of young people, a fact.
Well, it is interesting. Tucker has had his issues. I defend him because I think he's not always as bad as the media says. But by way of, it's interesting, ventriloquist journalism, when he had on George Stephanopoulos' sister, who is ostensibly blaming the decrease in the Christian population in the Middle East, in Israel, on Israel, and not identifying where the decrease in the Christian population is occurring in Muslim-controlled areas and where it's growing in Israel itself, to somehow make Israel look like it's the enemy of the Christians. I think he gets rightly called out on that, but that's what public debate is for. Yeah.
My criticism is just that, is really that he doesn't actually engage in any kind of debate. He has guests on, often some fairly shady or obscure characters, and he allows them to make allegations, which he then, in a kind of, he rubs his chin, he scratches his head. It's very interesting. He validates them through through a kind of pose that's very open-minded. Like, I'm considering an idea. I'm not committed to it. And there's a little bit of rhetorical back and forth. It's like, well, that's interesting. I'm not saying, but he is saying, but he's, so there's a kind of and it's kind of charming in its own way. Now, look, all of us are fans of Tucker, the old Tucker. I'm a huge fan of the old Candace. I spoke at her Blexit events. I did a speaking tour with Tucker last year in Australia. The two of us, with a couple of Australian speakers in 8 cities. We went to all the major cities together, and perfectly cordial. This topic, of course, never came up. So it's not like I'm rather awkwardly and unwillingly drawn into all this, but I do think that it's very damaging to the MAGA movement. It is not only splitting the MAGA movement ideologically, it is tearing it apart generationally. And that's one of the worst things you can do, right? What you're doing is you're bringing the young people over to this kind of Israel is to blame stance. The older generation does not think that. So you're cutting off the older generation, the Reagan generation, and even the early Trump generation with Gen Z.
The argument is, and to steelman your position for those who say, what good is Israel doing? It's sort of like either a satellite, it's our boots on the ground in the Middle East to make sure that radical Islam doesn't take over, a nuclear-armed Iran takes over and nukes the West. Others are going to say, let Israel fight its battle. And in fact, had they been able to fight without the political reins that America wanted to impose on them, they might have resolved this sooner. And others are going to say, let them fight, and we'll just protect ourselves against nuclear-armed Iran, because at the end of the day, it's either going to happen or it's not, or it's happened already or it's not. And Israel is not worth that much of a diversion of all of our resources. The billions in aid that go to Israel, go to Ukraine, go to funding these foreign wars. Let them fight, and let America focus on America first, as opposed to what many believe to be America second to an Israel first.
Right. So, look, I mean, first of all, America first has never meant America only. America first means that we take a realpolitik, a Machiavellian view of the world, where ultimately a state is going to act to protect its own interests. That's true of America. That's true of Israel. I am not saying that we have any permanent alliances, nor am I saying that anybody is getting a blank check. We had an interest in the Middle East. When I first came to America in 1978, between 1978 and about 2000, our interest in the Middle East had to do with Middle Eastern oil. We were very dependent on Middle Eastern oil. Remember OPEC, remember the oil crisis. So we had a kind of financial stake over there, which was our main rationale for getting involved. Global jihadism was not the main threat. In fact, it was the era of the Cold War. Interestingly, after the Cold War, the oil interest abated. America found a lot of natural gas. We are less dependent economically, but now we're facing this global ideological enemy that you might call Islamism or global jihad. And that puts a new spin on it, and our interests are changed. The trajectory is not the same. I also want to emphasize, and Trump knows this very well, this is not even a straight-out fight against Muslims. We're not fighting Muslims in Indonesia. We're not fighting Muslims in India. The Abraham Accords, you've got Muslim countries coming on board in a peaceful framework. I think Saudi Arabia is thinking of joining. So if you look at Saudi, you look at Egypt, you look at UAE, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, the Gulf Kingdoms, this is by no means a, quote, religious war in that sense. We're talking about a species of Islam that can be identified, that in fact identifies itself, and that is inherently violent. And that threat, I mean, it's going to find you if you can't look away and pretend it doesn't exist. It's coming home to us in America.
Oh, I say it might already be.
It is here.
I mean, at home in America, certainly we're seeing it in Canada. I guess the question is this, and this is the ultimate question. The documentary frames it as, a biblical war, which, whether or not you think it's a biblical war, it's certainly something of a spiritual war, and it's certainly something of a war of radical Islam and a godless left against the God of Christianity and Judaism. I mean, how does it? What is the resolution? Because
right,
so you go into the indoctrination in Palestine or in the Gaza and the West, the generational indoctrination. What's the solution to that?
Right. So it is important to realize that I am not doing a religious counter jihad. In other words, the radical Muslims are like, Allah made me do this, right? Here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if it is true that the enemy is, in a sense, going back to the way it was in the early times of the Bible. For example, if we are seeing a savagery on the part of radical Islam that resembles the savagery of the Philistines, let's look at it just in secular terms here. Then what that means is that Jews and Christians need to respond appropriately, right? Now, what does that mean? Well, the Israelis know what it means. It means that Israelis today have got to be tough. They've got to realize it's difficult to hold on to that land. They need to put on the armor the same way that the ancient Israelites did, right? But the big difference between Islam and Christianity is this. Islam has not lost the force of its original revelation. Christianity has. And so you've got jihadis on fire and weak-kneed Christians. So part of what I'm doing in this film is I'm trying to tell the Christians, listen, we once had that same evangelical fire. It's in the book of Acts. Christians who were serious about their faith and serious about their society. And I'm saying we need a Christianity that is invigorated. Why? Because Western civilization is built on two pillars, Athens and Jerusalem. You cannot take either of these pillars down or the whole building collapses, right? Athens is not the problem right now. The problem is Jerusalem. And so I'm trying to, in this film, demonstrate the need for strengthening the Jerusalem pillar, both in a religious but also in a cultural sense, because the American founders drew from that soil of both Athens and Jerusalem. And really, Athens and Jerusalem need to keep an eye on each other, because Athens supplies classical reason, Athens supplies democracy, but Jerusalem supplies the Hebrew prophets, and it supplies the idea of the Ten Commandments, an external moral code. So in some ways, and the philosopher I'm arguing something the philosopher Leo Strauss argued very eloquently, that Athens and Jerusalem are the two dueling, but nevertheless mutually fortifying elements that have created the peculiar dynamism of our civilization. That's how we became as strong, prosperous, and powerful as we are.
I know you have to go sooner than later. A couple of final questions. We'll see how deep they go. When you were down there documenting this, and I had seen the footage of October 7th because I was following Telegram accounts where they were unfiltered, and it wasn't a question of it not happening. It was proudly being shared on the internet by the perpetrators. In the documentary, one of the victims talking about how she was holed up in that bunker type building at the concert for 5+ hours. Did any of the victims, express any questioning as to how Israel was caught so off guard? Like, did you have that discussion off record because it wasn't in the documentary?
No. The remarkable thing here is that those people in those kibbutzes and the people at Nova, these are the liberal Jews. These are not the Netanyahu Jews. These are the people who actually would extend an olive branch. If you look at Nova, those were Bohemians. They were there at like a Bohemian festival. And the kibbutzes down, not necessarily in Judea and Samaria, but down at Gaza, those are all socialist communes, And so those guys are the last people to be on board with Netanyahu. But I think the very striking thing is that the Israeli left, even though, if you ask me what blinded Israel, what blinded Israel was its internal infighting that was going on at a fever pitch, fight about the Supreme Court, the lawfare against Netanyahu, and they took their eye off the ball and Hamas took advantage. So to me, that's the most plausible explanation. All the other explanations, like Netanyahu ordered the troops to stand down, let's put it this way. If the Israeli left had the slightest whiff that he did that, they would excavate the truth of it and destroy him completely. But no, that's not the correct explanation. I think one of the problems we have in our time, and maybe we close with this, is this, that because so many conspiracy theories have turned out to be true, and because young people have such an earned distrust of the CDC and the FBI, we've been lied to so much by the left. This is why people have become, in a way, suckers for the stupidest explanations. Here's a picture of the campus in Utah. I see a outline of a pipe. What if a Mossad agent climbed up the pipe and shot Charlie Kirk? Do you have any reason to believe that's the case? Do you have any evidence that there was in fact somebody in the pipe? Do you know if the pipe even leads to a place where? No, So when I watch this, I'm like, I'm like, is anybody stupid enough to like go along with this? And it turns out lots of people do.
In fairness to Alex Jones, like during Sandy Hook, he even said, I was going through a form of psychosis. I had seen all the things that the government had actually done. I started to hallucinate it where they weren't actually doing it. And I say to some extent, it would say we're to blame ourselves, because when they use the same arguments in blind support of Ukraine, you then understand why people are going to use the same opposition
of course.
In respect of Israel.
Well, the other thing is, I noticed this happening on the left. It happened in the mode of scholarship called deconstruction, right? They get the idea, a correct idea, by the way, that sometimes texts have multiple layers of meaning, and clever people can tease out those layers of meaning, and this becomes a kind of academic art. But after a while, it's carried so far that you take an absolutely straightforward sentence, like "I just got back from this restaurant from dinner," and the deconstructionist ends up playing with it so much that, as it turns out, you never went to the restaurant at all. And so what's happened is they've cultivated a habit of suspicion that now makes them unable to distinguish appearance from reality. I think that's really what's happened to our culture generally. But look, I don't blame these young people who are angry and who feel lost and where's my American dream? I can't buy a house like my parents. I mean, I get it. I blame the Pied Pipers who I think are misleading them in a very cynical way. Mm-hmm. So if we can close with this, I would just say, check out the film. I'd like you to go to the theater if you can, because I make it very cinematic for that purpose.
It's exquisitely well done. It's like full-length documentary. 90
It's 90 minutes, the perfect length. But listen, lots of people like to watch at home. It will be streaming on Rumble, basically starting early morning, Thursday morning. That's October 9th. And so if you can't watch it in the theater, to get theater tickets, by the way, you can't go to the theater. You have to go to the website, buy them on the website.
Website again is?
thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. So the dragons, plural, prophecyfilm.com. That will do it.
Prophecyfilm.com. And your personal social media?
It's just at Dinesh D'Souza. And follow me on X.
All right. And I was just checking to make sure I didn't miss any questions. I didn't miss any questions, Dinesh. Thank you very much.
This was great stuff. Thank you.
Everyone watching, you know where to find him. The documentary comes out next week. And Sunday night show with me and Barnes. We're going to talk about this and a bunch of other stuff. Thank you all for being here. Dinesh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Justin will give us the